Band of Brothers E Company, 506th Regiment, 101st Airborne, From Normandy to Hitler's Eagle's Nest, by Stephen E. Ambrose. Picture this. It's just past dawn on June 6, 1944, D-Day. You're a young lieutenant, barely 26 years old, crouched in a French hedgerow with a dozen soldiers you've managed to scrape together in the darkness. Most of them aren't even from your unit. Your commander has just given you a mission that sounds absolutely insane. See those 4 massive German cannons dug into that farmhouse across the open field? They're ripping apart the boys landing on Utah Beach right now. He looks at you with complete seriousness and says, "Take care of that battery." You've got 13 men. The Germans have 50. They're in fortified positions. You're in the open. Oh, and you have no heavy weapons. So what's your move? This wasn't some Hollywood script. This actually happened to First Lieutenant Richard Winters and a handful of men from Easy Company. And what unfolded at Brecourt Manor that morning became the stuff of legend, an action so perfectly executed that West Point still teaches it today. But here's the thing. It wasn't just about brilliant tactics. It was about something deeper. It was about a bond between men so strong that they would charge into hell itself if the guy next to them was willing to do the same. Stephen E. Ambrose captured this story in Band of Brothers, and he did something remarkable. He didn't just document history. He made you feel it. The book became a phenomenon, inspiring that incredible HBO series and reminding us all what real courage looks like when ordinary people face extraordinary circumstances. Ambrose had this gift for getting past the strategy maps and the general speeches to show us what it was actually like to be that scared kid from Iowa, thousands of miles from home, fighting for something bigger than himself. Today, we're going to walk alongside these men. We're going to feel our lungs burning as we run up Currahee Mountain. We're going to feel the bite of winter in the forests of Bastogne. And by the time we're done, you'll understand something profound about human nature, how shared hardship forges unbreakable bonds, and how ordinary people, when they trust each other completely, can accomplish the impossible. This isn't just a war story. It's a story about what we're all capable of when we refuse to let each other down. Our story starts not with gunfire, but with a decision. Summer of 1942. All across America, Kansas farms, Appalachian mining towns, even Yale dorms, young men are making a choice. They're volunteering for the Paratroopers, this crazy new experimental unit where you literally jump out of perfectly good airplanes. Why would anyone do that? Sure, there's an extra $50 a month, but that's not it. These guys looked around at basic training, saw a bunch of unmotivated draftees, and did the math. The real danger wasn't jumping from a plane. The real danger was going into combat next to someone you couldn't count on. As one paratrooper put it, "When the bullets start flying, I want to look up to the guy beside me, not down." They wanted to be elite. They wanted to be the best. That decision brought them to Toccoa, Georgia, a dusty camp at the base of a brutal hill the Cherokee called Currahee. We stand alone. This is where Easy Company was born. And this is where they met the man who would shape them through sheer, unrelenting torture, Captain Herbert Sobel. Sobel was, to put it bluntly, a nightmare. Arrogant, clumsy, and mean as a snake, he couldn't read a map to save his life and had the coordination of a newborn giraffe. But he was absolutely determined to break these men down and rebuild them into something harder than steel. He'd march them for hours without letting them drink, then check their canteens to make sure they were still full. He'd cancel weekend passes for dirty ears during inspection. His favorite punishment? Making exhausted men dig a 6-foot hole after a full day of training, just to fill it back in. But his signature move was Currahee. 3 or 4 times a week, he'd run them straight up that mountain and back down, 3 miles up, 3 miles down. He'd be at the front, with his arms flailing like a wounded bird, shouting, "Hi-ho, Silver!" while men puked and collapsed behind him. One day, right after a huge spaghetti lunch, he told them to relax. Then, as they wadded out of the mess hall, he blew his whistle. Plans changed. We run Currahee. Ambulances followed them up the mountain. Anyone who took a ride was out of the paratroopers by sundown. The men absolutely hated him. Behind his back, they called him the Black Swan, and quietly swore that if combat didn't get him, one of them would. For most of them, the enemy wasn't Germany, it was Captain Sobel. But something incredible was happening underneath all that misery. Through the endless push-ups, the night marches, the runs up Currahee, these individual guys from all over America were melting into one unit. They could recognize each other in pitch darkness by the sound of a cough. They knew each other's stories, fears, dreams. The bond forming between them went beyond friendship. They were becoming brothers. As Dick Winters later reflected, "Sobel brought us together. We had to survive him." And while Sobel was the hammer, Dick Winters was becoming the soul of Easy Company. Everything Sobel wasn't, Winters was: quiet, thoughtful. A natural leader who never raised his voice, and never asked his men to do anything he wouldn't do first. The men would follow him anywhere, not because they feared him, but because they couldn't bear the thought of letting him down. Sobel saw this, and his jealousy grew toxic. He started harassing Winters relentlessly, piling on every dirty job he could find. It all came to a head over the most ridiculous charge imaginable: failure to inspect the latrine at the proper time. Sobel gave Winters a choice: accept punishment or face court-martial. Winters chose the court-martial. He knew the company wasn't big enough for both of them. Before that could happen, the whole situation exploded. The non-commissioned officers, the sergeants who were the backbone of Easy Company, made an incredible decision. They wrote letters turning in their stripes. It was essentially mutiny, punishable by prison or worse. But they couldn't follow Sobel into combat. The man couldn't read a map and panicked under pressure. Following him into battle was suicide. Colonel Sink, the regimental commander, was furious. He demoted and transferred some of the ringleaders, but he also understood, you can't lead men who don't trust you. The problem was, Sobel had created the best trained company in the regiment. How do you remove him without admitting failure? The solution came unexpectedly. The Army needed someone to run a new jump school. Who better than the man who'd perfected the art of breaking down civilians and rebuilding them as soldiers? Sobel was transferred. Easy Company got a new commander. Dick Winters stayed with his platoon. The Sobel era was over, but its legacy remained. He had forged these men into steel. Now leaders like Winters would wield them. After Toccoa came jump school at Fort Benning. Standing in the door of that C-47 at 500 feet for the first time was the moment of truth. Most men were so pumped up they'd have jumped without parachutes. Only 2 men from Easy Company froze. With silver wings on their chests, they finally were what they'd been chasing: elite paratroopers. After final maneuvers, they boarded the ship Samaria bound for England. For almost all of them, it was their first time leaving America. As they passed the Statue of Liberty, homesickness mixed with anticipation in equal measure. They arrived in the quiet English village of Aldbourne in September 1943. For 9 months, they trained relentlessly while waiting for the invasion. But there was also life: drinking in pubs, charming English girls, and the occasional brawl with other units. As spring turned to summer in 1944, the tension became unbearable. Everyone knew the invasion was coming. On the last day of May, they said their goodbyes and loaded onto trucks for the marshalling area. They were as ready as any soldiers could be. More importantly, they trusted each other completely. At the airfield at Apottery, they got their mission: jump into Normandy, behind enemy lines hours before the beach landings, seize the causeways from Utah Beach, and prevent German reinforcements from reaching the coast. On the evening of June 5th, they geared up, over 100 pounds of equipment per man: rifles, ammo, grenades, explosives, rations. They were so overloaded they had to be helped into the planes. As the C-47s lifted into the night sky, they became part of a massive armada, 6,000 ships on the channel below, thousands of planes around them. One paratrooper leaned out his plane door and shouted into the darkness, "Look out, Hitler! Here we come!" At 1:10 a.m. on June 6th, they crossed the French coast, and everything went sideways. Thick clouds scattered the formation. Pilots got lost. German anti-aircraft fire tore through the sky, ripping into the thin aluminum of the planes. Panicked pilots flew too fast, too low, and turned on the green jump light miles from the drop zones. Easy Company, which should have landed in a tight pattern, was scattered across the entire Cotentin Peninsula. Lieutenant Winters landed near St. Mère-Église, miles off target. He'd lost his rifle and all his gear except the knife in his boot. This happened to paratroopers all across Normandy. Men were landing alone in trees in flooded marshes where some drowned under the weight of their equipment, but their training kicked in. The scattered drop, though chaotic, created confusion among the Germans. Reports of paratroopers were coming from everywhere, and German commanders couldn't figure out what was happening. In the darkness, the men found each other using small metal crickets, 1 click for challenge, 2 clicks for response. Small groups formed and moved toward their objectives. By dawn, Winters had gathered about a dozen men. They'd scrounged weapons and were moving toward their objective, when, at 8:30 a.m., he received the mission that would define him. At Brecourt Manor, 4 German 105mm cannons were hammering Utah Beach. His orders: take them out. 13 men against 50 Germans in fortified positions. Winters devised a brilliant plan: machine guns for covering fire, small teams flanking from different angles. Then he personally led the charge down a hedgerow, shouting, "Follow me." What happened next was poetry and violence. Working as a perfectly coordinated unit, Easy Company overwhelmed the position. Buck Compton, a former UCLA All-American catcher, threw a grenade like a fastball and caught a fleeing German in the head. In a few hours, they'd destroyed all 4 guns, killed 15 Germans, and captured 12 prisoners. Cost: 4 wounded, 2 dead. They'd saved countless lives on the beach. Winters was recommended for the Medal of Honor and received the Distinguished Service Cross. Easy Company had passed its first test brilliantly. But Normandy wasn't done with them. Over the next days, they led the brutal assault on Carentan in vicious house-to-house fighting. This wasn't clever tactics, it was a meat grinder. At one point, Winters had to literally run into the middle of a street with bullets snapping around him, kicking his men and screaming, "Move out!" to break them from the paralysis of fear. By the end of June, Easy Company had been in continuous combat for 3 weeks. Of the 139 men who jumped into Normandy, 65 were casualties. They went back to England to rest and take on replacements, but war doesn't wait. In September, they jumped into Holland for Operation Market Garden, a bold plan to seize bridges and create a path for British tanks to roll into Germany and end the war by Christmas. The jump was perfect. The Dutch greeted them with flowers and food like liberators. It felt like a parade. The optimism lasted about 3 days. At sun, Germans blew the crucial bridge just as they approached. Near Nuenen, Easy Company ran into a German panzer brigade and, for the first time, had to retreat under fire. The single highway they were trying to secure became known as Hell's Highway. Market Garden failed. The war wouldn't end by Christmas. Easy Company moved to a miserable stretch called the Island, flat muddy ground between 2 rivers where they settled into World War I-style trench warfare. For 2 months they lived in foxholes, under constant rain, cold, and artillery. It was a grinding, exhausting period of patrols and attrition. On October 5th, Winters led a brilliant night raid where 35 men routed 300 German SS troops. But the thrill of combat was gone, replaced by the grim arithmetic of survival. In late November, they finally got pulled back to Mourmelon, France for rest. They thought they'd stay through winter. There were passes to Paris, football games, promises of Christmas turkey. Then, on December 16th, everything changed. Hitler launched a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes. A huge hole had been punched in American lines. Eisenhower's only strategic reserve, the 82nd and 101st Airborne. All leaves canceled. Pack your gear, you're moving out. They loaded onto open trucks with no winter clothing, not enough ammo, not enough food, and no clear idea where they were going. As they rolled north into Belgium, they passed a river of retreating American soldiers, a panicked mob, throwing away rifles and shouting, "Run! They're killing everyone!" Easy Company just tightened their jaws and kept moving. Their destination was Bastogne, a small Belgian crossroads town where every major road converged. It had to be held. By December 20th, the Germans had completely surrounded it. The 101st Airborne was trapped. What followed became legendary. Easy Company positioned in a pine forest outside town, facing the village of Foy. The temperature plummeted. Snow fell relentlessly. They had no winter gear. Men wrapped their feet in burlap sacks that just soaked up snow, and trench foot became epidemic. German artillery rained down constantly. Tree bursts, shells exploding in treetops, sent deadly showers of wood splinters and hot steel onto them. They were starving, freezing, and exhausted. For a soldier in a Bastogne foxhole, the world shrank to a few feet of frozen earth. All that mattered was surviving the next hour. Men broke. Others held on, their sanity preserved only by the bond with whoever was shivering next to them. They talked about home, about after the war, anything to keep fear at bay. On December 22nd, Germans demanded surrender. General McAuliffe's famous reply, "Nuts." When the men in the foxholes heard that story, it gave them a grim laugh and a surge of pride. Christmas Eve, a sniper's bullet paralyzed Corporal Walter Gordon. Christmas Day, Patton's Third Army broke through and relieved the siege. The battered bastards of Bastogne had held. But instead of rest, they were ordered to attack. On January 13th, they had to take Foy, that same village they'd been staring at for weeks. Their commander, Lieutenant Norman Dyke, was a staff officer with no combat experience. In the middle of the attack, under heavy fire, he froze. Dick Winters, now battalion executive officer, saw the disaster unfolding. He relieved Dyke on the spot and ordered Lieutenant Ronald Spears to take over. Without hesitation, Spears ran straight through German lines, across the entire town, linked up with another platoon, then ran back through the town under intense fire to lead the assault. His insane bravery galvanized the men. They took the town. The Battle of the Bulge was the costliest battle the U.S. Army ever fought. Easy Company had paid dearly. From Bastogne, they pushed into Germany. In April 1945, they stumbled upon a concentration camp near Landsberg. For the first time, they saw the true horror they'd been fighting against. Emaciated prisoners, piles of bodies, the smell of death. These men who thought they'd seen everything found a new depth of horror. It gave stark, final meaning to their sacrifice. Their journey ended in the Bavarian mountains at Berchtesgaden, where they captured Hitler's Eagle's Nest. As they celebrated in Hitler's abandoned fortress, drinking his wine and looking over the Alps, the news came. The war in Europe was over. They had survived. They had done it, from Toccoa to the Eagle's Nest. They were, and always would be, a band of brothers. When you finish Band of Brothers, the stories stick with you. The charge at Bricourt Manor. The frozen foxholes of Bastogne. Dick Winter's quiet courage. But beyond the battles and heroics, there's a deeper lesson here. One that matters just as much today as it did in 1944. It's about where real strength comes from. Easy Company was elite, no question. But what made them elite wasn't just toughness or tactical skill. It was the absolute, unbreakable trust they had in each other. The certainty that the person on your left and the person on your right would do anything for you, and you'd do the same for them. This wasn't something they were born with. It was forged in the shared misery of running up Currahee under a tyrant, in the terrifying darkness over Normandy, in the agony of watching a friend fall and knowing you had to keep going. We often think of strength as individual, the lone genius, the self-made entrepreneur, the star athlete. But Easy Company shows us something different. The most powerful force in the world is a group of ordinary people who've committed to an extraordinary standard and to each other. Their motto was, "We stand alone," but the unspoken second half was, "together." So what can we take from their story into our own lives? 3 things stand out. First, lead from the front. Dick Winters became legendary, not because he gave great speeches, but because he was always there, sharing the risk, leading the charge. Whether you're captain of a team, leading a project, or just part of a friend group, the principle is the same. Never ask someone to do something you wouldn't do yourself. Real leadership isn't about authority. It's about earning respect through action. Second, embrace shared challenges. Easy Company didn't become brothers sitting in a comfortable classroom. They became brothers overcoming immense hardship together. Don't shy away from difficult things in your life. Join a team. Volunteer for a tough project. Take on something that requires you to rely on others. Shared struggle is the fastest path to deep, meaningful connections. It's in those moments you truly see what you and the people around you are made of. Finally, look for quiet competence. The world is full of loud voices demanding attention, but the most effective people, the real leaders, are often like Dick Winters, calm, prepared, focused on getting the job done rather than getting credit. Learn to recognize and value the person who leads by example, who puts the team first, who shows up every day and does the work. That's someone worth following and worth becoming. The men of Easy Company weren't superheroes. They were ordinary young men who found themselves in extraordinary times. They were scared, tired, and homesick. But they found something in each other that allowed them to endure the unendurable and achieve the impossible. They teach us that the uniform we wear or title we hold matters far less than our commitment to the people beside us. They teach us we're all stronger together than we could ever be alone. That was a summary of Band of Brothers by Stephen E. Ambrose. We've touched on the major moments of their incredible journey, but honestly, a summary can only be a map. The real treasure comes when you walk the territory yourself. The true power of this book is in the small details, the personal letters, the quiet moments of reflection that make these men feel real. This summary is here to help you see if this story is one you want to explore more deeply. If anything we talked about today stirred something in you, if you felt a connection to these men and their story, grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning history. It's about experiencing a profound lesson in humanity that'll stay with you forever. The link is in the description below. If you found this journey valuable and it gave you a new perspective, please click that like button and subscribe. It tells us we're on the right track and ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.